Hello, this is Mator, and today I'm going to be introducing you my latest development, MXPF, which stands for Mator's xEdit Patching Framework. This is a library or framework for people who want to make scripts that automatically generate patches. So this is very similar to SkyProc, but it uses xEdit as a base instead of SkyProc's Java framework. I'm very excited about this. I think it's very powerful and very easy to use. It really reduces the learning curve of making xEdit scripts, and I hope that you will use it and find it useful. So to get started here, we're just going to download it from the Nexus mods. I haven't made it public yet, but it will be public when I publish this video. The download cannot be downloaded with a mod manager because it's something that needs to be installed with xEdit, one of the dependencies. I'm going to assume that you know how to use xEdit or Test5Edit. If you're using this is kind of an advanced tool. This isn't something that you really want to use as a mod user. This is more so something you use as a mod author. You might, as a mod user, you might be required to install this by a mod author, but generally speaking, that's just about it. So once you've downloaded it, you'll have an archive with this inside of it. There's a README. You can open that and view that if you want to. I won't do it in the tutorial. It's mostly the same information that I'm going over here. And then the only folder you really need to install is the edit scripts folder, which I'll go over right now. So we're going to install that in your test5edit directory. You're just going to merge it with your existing edit scripts folder, and if there's any conflicts, just replace them. And that's it. It is now installed. In the edit scripts folder, there's a combination of several scripts. There's two sample scripts, the rebalance armor script and the save female NPCs script. These both show you how you can use MXPF to do different things. And then there's a tests script, which is a script which tests the MXPF framework to make sure it's functioning properly, mainly for development purposes. But you can also look at it to see how the code is used if you have looked at the samples and the documentation already. And then the lib folder, which is where we have the libraries themselves, MXPF, MT functions, and JVTest. So JVTest is pretty cool. It's a testing framework I put together. Very exciting. It means that I can be more confident that my code is working properly. Yeah, so that's pretty exciting too. Let's now take a quick look at the documentation here. You can extract this to Test5Edit's folder if you want to, or you can put it somewhere else. It really doesn't matter. But you do have to extract it to view it properly, otherwise the CSS and the image won't display. But you open it up and you get this really nice looking documentation. The documentation goes over pretty much everything: dependencies, download and setup, running the tests, user constants, developer constants, variables, and all of the different functions that you can use. I really recommend that you refer to this if you're planning on developing with MXPF, so you know how it works, and it's a very good documentation, so I highly recommend you give it a peek. Looking at the sample scripts might be a good first step though for diving in, but we'll get back to that later. Now I'm going to show you, if you want to do tests with MXPF, you need to install the ESPs. And so I use Mod Organizer. I'm going to show you real quickly how to install these ESPs as a mod in Mod Organizer. Just going to go to your mods folder, create a new folder, test MXPF for instance, and drop all these ESP files inside of it. In Mod Organizer, all mods refresh, and there we go. And it should work. I'm not sure what just happened there. There we go. Now they're in the loader. So now that we have the test ESPs, we can run the tests. So I'm going to do that first, and then I'll show you a sample script. So to run the tests, you're going to want to load only these three test ESPs. You can only run these tests with Skyrim. So if you don't have Skyrim, then you can't run these tests. Sorry. But also, this is more of a developer thing, but I want to show you just because it's kind of cool. So you just go right click on any of these files, choose Apply Script, and choose from the drop-down menu MXPF Tests. I'll show you again kind of slowly. So you'll go in here and you'll find in the scripts list MXPF-tests. Select it and click OK. And then it'll run the tests, and hopefully they all pass. It'll give a little report at the end about the tests that were run, how many passed, how many failed, and specs, which is expectations. It'll also save a log into your edit scripts logs folder. So that's pretty cool. This is basically testing all the functionality with these test plugins. So kind of cool just to know that it works. I'm going to close this real quick now. And don't save anything after you run the tests. So I'll now give a quick rundown of the example scripts provided with MXPF, what they do, and kind of how they work. So I'm just going to load Test5Edit here with a whole bunch of plugins for the purposes of showing you these test scripts. So the first script I want to show you is the Save Female NPCs test script. So this would be, well, example script. So MXPF Save Female NPCs. So I'm just going to open this with Notepad++, which is my preferred text editor. You can also use whatever other text editor you want. Atom, Sublime Text are both really good as well. So you can see here, the very first line says unit, a space, and then a name. What this name is it doesn't matter very much. You can name it pretty much whatever you want. Generally speaking, it should describe what this does, what it is. User script is the default. You can just leave that most of the time, and then you end the line with a semicolon. Ending a line with a semicolon is general Pascal syntax. I recommend, if you want to learn about Pascal, which is the language that these scripts are based off of. It's not quite Pascal. It's technically a variant of Delphi, which is object-oriented Pascal, which is interpreted. So it's a little funky, but if you look at some Pascal or Delphi guides, everything you see in there should apply fairly well. Here, with a few exceptions, you can't define your own types very well, and other small things like that. Anyways, so we have this script. Our next line is uses, and then we have a single quote, lib \MXPF single quote semicolon. You'll want this line on every script that you make that uses MXPF. This is how you tell the interpreter to look at MXPF's code and use functions from it. We then have function initialize integer. This is an entry point for xEdit. What xEdit does when it runs a script is it first runs the function initialize integer, and then the next thing it would run would be a process function process interface returns integer, and the last thing it runs is function finalize integer. With MXPF, you pretty much don't need to use the other two functions, the other entry points at all. You can be fine with just a function initialize, which is nice, very simplified. We then declare some local variables that we're going to use in the body of this function. We have I, space integer, which is an integer variable which has the identifier I. Then we have two string lists, which are basically list of strings, and a string is just any sequence of characters. SL and files. And then we have rec, which is an interface. Interface is a special type. It's a generic interface type. You use this type whenever you need to interface with something that's represented in xEdit, like a record or a file or an element. So in this case, I have it called rec because I'm using it for a record. The next thing we do is we have begin, which means we're going to have a body of code. So we can put however much code we want between this begin as long as we end it by saying end and then a semicolon. The very end of the file, we then have end period, which basically says this is the end of the code. Inside of here, the first line is a comment. We have two backslashes indicates a comment. We then have two lines where we are initializing the string lists. So we have :equal for assignment. A lot of languages use equal. Pascal's a little weird. It uses :equal for assignment. So what this is doing is it's creating a new string list object and putting it into the SL variable. We do the same thing with the files. We create a new tStringlist object and we put it into the files variable. We then have another comment. It says get user file selection. So what we're doing here is we're calling a function which is defined in MTE functions, which is one of the libraries that I provide with MXPF. And what this function does is it'll make a GUI window from which a user can check files that they want and then click OK or cancel. Or just OK, there is no cancel. The first argument of this multi-file select function is the file string list. This string list will return a list of the files that the user selected. And we can find more information on this in here. There's a lot of functions in here, so we're going to search multi-file select. Is that incorrect? There we go. I must have made a typo. You search for it, you find here, it gives a user a dialog from which they can select one or more files, gives you example usage, and then here's the function definition and all of the code. A lot of code there. So the first thing we do is we pass in that string list so that we can get back the user selection of files, and then we give a prompt, which is basically just telling the user what we want them to do. After that, we call initialize MXPF. This is the first function in the script that's from MXPF. What this does is it just sets up the variables and everything else for MXPF to function. You need to call this in every script where you use MXPF. We then call default options MXPF, which sets up some default options with MXPF. You don't have to call this every time, but most of the time you want to use the default options, you can call this procedure. If we go into the documentation, you can see there are links here. Initialize MXPF says pretty much what I just said, and default options MXPF. Well, you can see here what it sets to true, which variables, which are these right here. Yeah, so looks like I'm missing a few in there. I'll have to update the documentation here soon. Next function we call is set inclusions files.commaText. So .commaText, we're now accessing an attribute of the files string list. So if you wanted to learn about what a tString list is, what you could Google is Delphi tString list. And then we'll find a whole bunch of results. You choose the first one, and it describes for us what a tString list is, and it tells us all of the properties. It also gives a whole bunch of good example code of how you can use tString lists. Count capacity strings, text, comma, text. That's the one we're doing. Getter set the list by a big string. The string will have the list string separated by commas. So in our case here, set inclusions, we can learn from the documentation, sets the file selection mode to inclusion and loads the comma-separated list of files S into the MX files string list. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Affects which files load records will load records from. So we're basically taking the user selection, we're turning it into a comma-separated string, and then we're feeding it into this function so MXPF knows what files the user selected. We then call load records, and we provide a record signature. Record signatures, you can find them in Test5Edit. If you select any record, you can see in the record header a signature for that record, which is usually 4 characters. Actually, it's always 4 characters. So ammo is ammunition, ingestible is ALK, book is book, cell is cell, and in our case, we are interested in getting NPC non-player character, and that's NPC underscore. So what this one line of code does is it loads all of the NPC records in the user's file selection into MXPF. Normally this would take like 50 lines of code. So I really want you to appreciate that this one line of code is really powerful and impressive. And you can go into MXPF if you want to, and we can find load records, and we can see just how much code that is behind the scenes. Quite a bit. And within this code, we are actually calling other code in MXPF, so quite impressive. But for you, very simple. you just call this one line of code and you've got all of the NPC records or all of the armor records or all of the weapon records, you name it. Pretty powerful. The next thing we do is we use a for loop to loop over all of the records we've loaded. The way we do this is we do for I being an integer variable, colon equal to 0, so we started at 0, to max record index, do begin some stuff, and then end with a semicolon. So what this basically means is we are going to have a body of code which executes once for I equals 0, I equals 1, I equals 2, all the way up to max record index. If max record index is 0, we don't execute the code at all. If it's 1, we execute the code once. And each time we execute the code, we use the value for I that was just assigned to it. So 0 at first, then 1, then 2, then 3, etc. So max record index is a function provided by MXPF. Once again, we can go to the documentation, find it, and it says gets the number of items in MX records minus 1. The maximum index you can call get record with successfully. This is for use when looping through loaded records. There you go. So the first thing we do in this loop, we take our rec local variable and we assign get record I to it. So we're basically getting the very first record at first, and then we get the second record, and then the third, etc. And each time we're putting it into this variable rec. Then we do a comparison. Give is an aliased function from MTE functions. If we go into MTE functions, we can search give and hopefully find it after a little while. It says get element edit values enhanced with element by IP. So get element edit values is a function that's provided by xEdit. And if you go to the MXPF page, you can find test5edit scripting functions, which explains the functions that are provided by test5edit. So this is actually right here. This is the first time we're calling any function that is provided by xEdit and not a library or just plain old normal Delphi. And we're actually calling an aliased version of it from MTE functions, so pretty cool. In here, we can find get element edit values, and we can see that it returns a string. We feed in an element and a name, and it gets the element's value represented as text. It's a little misleading. This should be path. You can specify whatever path you want to any element for this to work. So in this case, the path that we're using, well, we're using the record rec, and then we're using the path acbs/flags/female. That means that there's first an element called acbs. Inside of that element, there's an element called flags. And inside of that element, there's an element called female. So if we look at an NPC in here, we find acbs, and we see dash configuration. So that's a little confusing. It's close, but there's a dash afterwards. You can ignore the dash and everything after it and refer to an element by just this first 4-character thing if that's there. In some cases, there isn't a 4-character signature to the element. In that case, you just have to type out the full name. So we have acbs, flags, female. It says over here female, but this is a special type of element. It's a flag. In most cases, when you get element edit values, you'll get the exact value that you see in the editor, with the one exception of flags where you will get either a 0 or a 1. A 0 if the flag is not present, a 1 if it is. So here we are checking to see if the female flag is present, equals 1. This is a comparison operator, not an assignment operator, for those of you who know other programming languages. And if that is the case, we add it to the name of that record to our string list. We end the loop and we repeat it for every single record that MXPF loaded. Finally, we clean up. We call finalize MXPF, which you have to call at the end of every script where you use MXPF to free up the memory and clear all the variables. Then we save the list of female NPCs to this file. Now, it's important to note that I'm not specifying a path to this file, I'm just specifying a file name. When you do this, the file will be saved wherever the user ran test5edit from, wherever test5edit's working directory is. So that would be where the executable is usually. So somewhere in this folder, or right here in this folder, a document called femalnpcs.txt will appear after the script is run. Then we free the toString list that we created, which frees up the memory that was allocated to them. Also very important, make sure you free up everything, all memory that you allocate. So whenever you use .create, you probably want to free that afterwards. And that's it. That's this script. I broke it down to you at a very basic level, the hopes that you can understand it regardless of your programming experience. Certainly, I know that even with the amount that I broke it down, it still might be confusing to you. I assure you, it gets easier the more you do, and following tutorials on the internet will help you a lot with basic language, programming language ideas, and understanding. So we're going to now run this script. I've been talking about it for so long, we should actually run it so we can see what it's like. Click OK. Now we get this file selection screen, just as I said, and there actually is cancel. Interesting. We can now specify whatever files we want to export female NPCs from. I'm going to just choose Skyrim and click OK. Give it a moment. It'll run. It'll take about 13 seconds. A little longer, 19 seconds. Okay. And it says it saved a log, and that's it. We didn't have it print any other messages. But if we go now here, we see female NPCs.txt. We open that up, and here's a list of every female NPC in Skyrim.esm. It's a big list. But there you go. It works. And really, honestly, not that much code. Compared to other scripts, this is really short. 34 lines. That's very doable. You look at some other scripts, you'll see there are thousands of lines. Like a lot of my automation tool scripts are huge. MXPF really makes it very approachable, very doable for someone who doesn't have a lot of programming experience to get their feet wet with xEdit scripting. And I'm very excited about it, and I hope that you are too. Plans for the future. This video, I think I did a pretty good job going into a script and how to install and use MXPF, but I'd like to do more. I plan on making more videos in the future about other MXPF scripts. There's also, of course, plans for expanded functionality. Right now, MXPF can do a fair bit. It's pretty powerful, but I'd like to do more. In addition to that, there's a plan to do a major update to the MTE functions library. Right now it's kind of a mess. There isn't really much versioning happening, and it's just a huge file of 3,000 lines of code of helper functions. There's a big plan to refactor that. Hasn't happened yet. It'll happen sometime. And possibly more. Really, xEdit scripting is very powerful, more powerful than SkyProc in many ways, and more reliable as well. So I'm really hoping that through initiatives like this, I can help to move the community over for Skyrim modding and for Fallout 4 modding too, over to xEdit scripting. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you find MXPF to your liking. See ya.